We first encountered James Hemings as Jamie in Jefferson's records, who's an 8-year-old boy who catches mockingbirds for Jefferson. Jefferson loved to keep mockingbirds, and so he paid James Hemings to find them for them and capture them. And then we see him progress to a 19-year-old who's in Richmond working on his own. He's serving as a traveling valet for an Englishman who has come to the United States. And Jefferson doesn't even really know where he is. He writes to William Short, who's in Richmond, and says, "Find James and tell him to come straight on to me at Philadelphia." And James knows that he's about to go to France. At this time, they're thinking that they're going to be there just a couple of years. But that's long enough for him to know that he wants to go see his family first. So he doesn't go along with Jefferson's edict, come straight on to me. He wants to go to Monticello to see his family, who's still back here, and say goodbye to them before he goes off on this adventure. He even is sort of exasperating. He exasperates William Short, who keeps getting them to try to go on. So you get a sense of what the nature of his relationship with Jefferson was like. He knew Jefferson well enough to know that he could have a liberal interpretation of this "come straight on to me," and he doesn't. He defies Jefferson in that sense and takes an action which you might not think an enslaved person would do if a master said, "come straight on." He does something else. And so then we see him going to France, and when Jefferson arrives at Le Havre, he sends him on to Rouen to make hotel reservations. Here's a 19-year-old Virginian, enslaved man who, as far as we know, doesn't really speak French. Maybe it gathered a few phrases that Jefferson taught him to be able to say things to people as he encountered on the road. So he goes to Rouen, makes the hotel reservations, comes back, and then goes to Paris, is trained as a chef. That's why Jefferson took him. While he is there, near the end of his stay, he hires a tutor to help him perfect his French. I think this is the first indication that he's maybe thinking about staying there, because spending 2 years studying French and spending money for that would seem an odd thing to do if he expected to come right back to Virginia and stay. So we see him becoming a professional. He comes back to America, is Jefferson's cook in New York and in Philadelphia. He's paid wages just like a white worker. And then Jefferson signs an agreement with him that says that if he comes back to Monticello and trains a chef here, that he will be given his freedom, which is what he does. He comes back and trains his brother Peter to be a chef, and then goes to Philadelphia, and then sort of lives a pretty peripatetic life, traveling around. Jefferson says at one point, I think his journeys will end in the moon. So, and he was planning a trip to Spain. So we get the sense that he'd gone back to Europe, and that he wasn't just traveling around Virginia. He was going places with his freedom. He doesn't end well, unfortunately. That Jefferson asked him after his election if he wanted to be chef in the White House, and he would have been the first sort of African-American head of the kitchen during that time. But he decides that he doesn't want to do it. He gets into some sort of power struggle with Jefferson. He wants Jefferson to write him a letter and ask for a formal appointment. Jefferson won't do that. As a matter of fact, Jefferson, when he got his cook, sort of arranged it through a third party. James and he sort of have ruffled feathers. They sort of are smoothed over. He comes back to Monticello to work for Jefferson for a time. And then a few months after he leaves, he commits suicide. So it's a dramatic story, and you're left to ponder, what drove him to that? What was it about his life that made him, so despairing that he killed himself? But if you think of someone who had the experiences that he had in another country where he could have been a free man, came back to America, and to know that there was really no place for anybody like him, in the country. And so it's a dramatic story, and it's a sad story, but this was an extremely talented person. And you get a sense of the tragedy of slavery and the tragedy of white supremacy, because there was no place for him, even though he was highly trained.